Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Positive Success Show. I have a very special guest with us today. Her name is Ali Meehan, and she's the founder of Costa Women, and she's also a certified Avenue coach, growth coach. Ali is in the same space as a lot of us, a lot of us that travel around the world, moving and transitioning from career to career, from country to country, and really trying to figure out, what is it? What is the secret sauce? What are the ingredients to making life meaning and fulfilling, and at the same time, achieving and pursuing our goals? So, Ali, can you tell us, first of all, thank you so much for being on the show. It's so great to see you again.
It's good to see you too, Dominique. Really nice to catch up with you.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about, your journey traveling throughout the world? And there is a term you coined, or a term you use in terms of identifying who you are in this space of living abroad. And I'd love for you to share kind of where you've been through life and how you got to the point of developing and creating Costa Women and that whole journey.
Sure, yeah, no, happy to. So I started off living in Australia. I'm originally from England, and I moved out to Australia just to see what it would be like to live abroad, really. I mean, it's a bit of a far place to go, but I did go over there. And lived there for quite some time. Managed to get a job there, so worked there for a little while, and really enjoyed the experience of living in a foreign country, although Australia is not so foreign if you're English. But living in a foreign country, the whole culture changed, because even though there's a lot of Australia that's very British or UK, would be familiar for UK nationals, it's still different. They're very positive people. Obviously the sunshine helps, and they just have a different way of looking at life. So that was a really good experience. But my father had Alzheimer's, so I ended up having to come back to the UK and spend time with him, which was amazing. But it did lead me on a journey of maybe the UK isn't where I want to live long term. Yeah. Maybe I'll live somewhere else. So when I came back to England, I was given the opportunity to change careers. And my first career was 17 years in a legal practice. And I was given the opportunity to change careers to become a marketing and export manager for a company that sold container glass. So we sold beer bottles, wine bottles, spirit bottles, food jars, anything around glass containers. And we sold it globally. So I was very fortunate in that I could travel the world on the company budget. And I was single then, so it was a great life to have. And career to have. So Australia was one of my markets, so it meant I could go back there as a visitor this time. And I was traveling to Australia and New Zealand about 4 or 5 times a year. So that really gave me more of an experience of the rich cultures that there are out in the world. And then the company that I was working for at the time, we were doing a lot with the US dollar, and it was the time when the US dollar changed the currency, because the US dollar became very high, very valuable, and transferring the money from GB pounds to US dollars meant it wasn't possible for me to continue in that role. So I got headhunted for a job for a business development consultancy, who originally I thought I would be working out of an office in the UK. But my first day of work, the big boss came in and had just been to an e-business seminar, which said basically nobody is going to have offices going forward. Everyone's going to work from home. And this was 2000. So very, very cutting edge at the time. So my first day of work, I walked into the office, he walked in, I had not met him before. He fired the man that had hired me and just called me into the office and said, we're going to close down this office. If you want to stay and help us close it, you're very welcome to, and I'll recompense you for the fact that you've no longer got a job. So I said, okay, got nothing else to do in my time now. So I stayed with them, but when I started saying, is it okay if I go for job interviews? He said, no, we've decided that we'd like you to stay on as the team. I'll make you a director of the company, but we want you to work from home. So in 2000, I was probably one of the first people in my town to have broadband internet access into my home for work.
Yeah.
And they were very interesting days, because there was just 2 of us based in the UK then, the others were all back in the Middle East. And it was a real learning curve, you know, working from home on your own. Nobody else was really doing it. We used Regis to receive our mail and take our phone calls. So people thought we still had an office in the UK, but they would put the calls through to us. And I would meet her on a monthly basis, and we'd just have a coffee and a chat to see how we were doing. But you really had to rely on your own wits to, you know, if your computer went wrong, the IT department I had was based in Dubai. So the computer went wrong, you really had to try and work it out for yourself, although he would help you as much as possible, but because of the time difference, it wasn't always possible. And in those days, we were using Hotmail Messenger to connect with each other across the globe, because that was the only way that we could, you know, have a quick chat with each other. So really interesting time, really enjoyed it. I did that for 9 years, but towards the end of my time there, the last 4 or 5 years, they actually asked my husband and I to move out to the Middle East. So we moved out there and lived there for nearly 5 years.
Wow.
I'd already met my husband at that time, and he was living in Spain. He actually comes from my hometown, but I didn't know him. And we just happened to meet at a party in the UK, and he said, well, you're working from home, why don't you work from home in Spain? So I asked my company, and they said, yeah, that's fine, because I used to commute out to the Middle East probably about 4 times a year. And that's how I ended up living in Spain. So we kept the home here when we were back in the Middle East working, and just used to have it as a holiday home whenever we came home from Dubai. And then in 2009, really, I'd had enough of, because it was a very full-on job and not much free time at all. So decided that we'd had enough and we're going to move back to Spain. And we came back here, and then a friend of ours who's had a business in Thailand, in Phuket, said, will you come and work for me and help me with what I'm doing? So we both moved out to Phuket and lived there for nearly a year, finally coming back to Spain in 2010. So really grateful for the rich cultures that I've experienced, all very different, and just being able to travel and get work in the different countries that we've lived in.
Yeah, and you know, it's such an incredible, I mean, and that's like, you know, you just made it so concise, and that's like several years, you know, several decades of your life, you know,
Yeah.
working abroad. And you know, now that, you know, you're at this point, it's like you've had all that experience, and you've gained all those different cultures. So it makes your particular life experience so unique. You know, it's so unique. I think all of us that are foreigners that live in different lands, we just accumulate all these different experiences, and it makes us very, very different from people back home in our home countries.
Yeah, I always say to people that, because obviously I have a lot of interaction now with new ladies that are just moving out to Spain, and quite often it is a big cultural challenge when they first move out, even though we're not far from where they've come from, maybe, or they've been here on holiday a lot of times, but it's very different when you live in a country. And my top tip for them always is, you know, after the first 6 months, try and go back to your own country, because you will then suddenly realize how much you've changed and how much the culture of the country that you were living in is no longer so interesting for you, because you're starting to see the way other people live, and you're starting to enjoy living in another country. So that's always my tip when they're beginning to feel homesick and missing their friends and family, is to just take that trip back to their original country if they can do.
Yeah, no, that's a really really good tip. And in terms of your work or your founding of Costa Women, how did you start it? Like, what was your idea at the very time that you started it? And it's this huge network, the biggest network in Spain for women living, planning to, working in Spain and all that. So how did you even start that whole venture?
Yeah, so I literally started it because I wanted to make friends. And I think that's the best way to start a business, is to find something that is something that you're searching for yourself.
Yeah.
And because you know that there's probably going to be a market for you if you do that. So I started it literally to make friends because of my experience of working from home when we lived here originally. I was concerned at how I was going to meet and make friends with women. And also when we lived here previously, it was before Facebook or any of the social media networks were really up and running. So I thought, well, let me create something and see whether women are interested to join it. So that's when in 2010, I started it as an online website, thinking it would stay online because I'm used to the online world. For me, that is a world.
Yeah.
And women quite quickly started saying, well, can't we meet up in real life? Okay, that's a novelty. So we started creating events and it's gone on from there. So we have 9,600 members now, and we've got 38 locations where we meet up, or we're meeting up in person pre-COVID. But since COVID, we've hosted over 230, well, last year in 2020, we hosted 230 online events to try and keep the community together and motivated. And now we're starting to host local events again as things change. So yeah, but it really was just for me to find friends. Now I've got rather a lot.
9,600 of them. No, it's amazing, Ali. Like, you are a pioneer in this online working space. I didn't even realize that until you mentioned it in this conversation. But having the ability to, as you say, rely on your wits, to make it work, to make this whole thing work. I think that's wonderful. And in terms of Costa Women and what you do and what you stand for, what is the thing, what are the topics that you really teach women as they come into a new country, or if they're thinking of starting something new? Like, what is the number one thing that you really try to cultivate so they have that mindset to be successful in Spain?
I think one of the things is to do as much research as possible before they arrive, because it will be different. If you've come here on holiday, it's not the holiday experience. You have to work. Most of the ladies have to work, so you can't just lie about in a sunlounger all day. You are going to have to work, and you are in a completely different culture to what you're used to. When you come here on holiday, you probably see a very small portion of that. But when you're living here full time, it's a completely different environment to maybe what you've experienced, both socially and for business as well. The costs of running a business here are very high. And that's something that people don't actually research before they get here. And then suddenly they realize, it's going to be expensive to actually have a business here. And I think the whole area around familiarity, it's a comfort to have things that are familiar, but then we don't grow.
Yeah.
So it's whether you want that growth or whether you want to be comfortable in your life. And most of the women I see and meet here, they've got rid of the familiarity. They've decided that they want to grow in their lives and grow their businesses. And change makes us move forward. So maybe our initial reaction is to latch onto something familiar because it's familiar. But we need to, I think personally, we need to be in situations where we can actually grow ourselves. And that could be that you've decided to move overseas. The women here are, they've all got stories to tell. They've all taken that leap of faith. They're all very courageous beings, and we don't necessarily see it. Yeah. We just, I just moved overseas, but it is a huge thing to have done. There's a lovely quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, who says people have a hard time letting go of their suffering. Out of the fear of the unknown, they prefer suffering that's familiar. And I think it's I don't think of the word familiar as being how it's spelled. I think of it as being fear familiar, because if we carry on repeating the same old all the time, we just get into a cycle. And it's really good, especially at the moment, to try and get yourself out of that cycle of familiar and launch yourself into something that will really help you and your business grow. My word for 2021 is fearless. And that's not having the absence of fear, because we all have fear, but to use that fear in a positive way, you know, to really push myself and my boundaries so that I can move forward. And I love having a word for a year. I don't know if you have one, Dominique.
I totally do. I love that you do that. I'm like, yes, I'm not the only person that does this. Yeah, mine is consistent. It's consistent.
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, you know, anything that I'm doing, it's all about consistency, be it health, be it parenting, be it business. Everything's about consistency. But I love your words, your play on words for fear familiar.
Yeah.
Anyone listening, you know, like fear familiar, are you holding on to those fears? And that wonderful quote that you said as well. And fearless, it's a great word. I think a lot of 2020 was, you know, everyone was just in this state of fear and paralyzed. And so now that, you know, the doors are opening up or things are looking a little bit brighter, how to overcome those fears in order to step into and launch yourself in this new direction where you can grow. And so on that note, can you tell us how you know, what you teach or tell, you know, your clients or your communities how to overcome fear?
Yeah, sure. So particularly at the moment, we are all pressing the reset button. The world isn't what we left a year ago. It's already moved on and changed. So I think we really need to be asking our customers what they actually want and need now, because things are different to what they wanted and needed, and their way of buying has changed, and the whole way of doing business, I think, has changed. So it's really important that we actually check in with who we're serving and ask them what they want now. And rather than just building something that we think they want and hoping that they come, I think it's really important to ask them what they want. Within our Avenue Growth Coaching that I offer, we really major on having a concept that sells. Because I see so many women that decide that they want to create a new business or relaunch an old one, and they spend weeks and weeks creating a beautiful website. They then spend weeks and weeks fiddling with the bells and whistles. Sometimes they'll say, oh, it's not ready yet, because they want it to be 100% perfect. And then they create their social media pages and their posts all fit neatly into Instagram. And they haven't actually asked their customers or clients if this is a service that they want. So first of all, within the coaching that I offer, we look at first, do you have a concept that sells? Do you have people that want to buy what it is you're offering? Do you have competition? Because actually competition can be a good thing, because it means that somebody's already done the hard work and researched that product or service and knows that there's a market for it. If there's no competition, there's probably a reason why there's no competition, because probably somebody tried it and it just, you know, it failed. So I think research, as I said earlier on, is really important, and find out what, you know, if people want what you offer, then that's great. But maybe you're not even ready to launch even yet, because you haven't found who your ideal client is. And again, I think that's another area where we shy away from, knowing who we want to target our messages to, what their pain points are, where they hang out. I love Twitter as a tool. I've always loved it. I've loved it for the last 10 years, but I discovered a few years ago that most of my audience weren't actually on Twitter. And they were living on Facebook. So I've had to sort of break up almost with Twitter, and spend more time really understanding Facebook and how Facebook works. But again, you know, with the changes that have happened in the last year or so, there's new platforms like Clubhouse, but also a lot of people I see have stopped using Facebook or using it as much as they were using. So maybe even if your product or service is still working and everything's happening, maybe it's time to actually reevaluate the social media platforms you're on, just to make sure that your customers are still there and still using those platforms, because it could be that they've moved on.
Oof. That's a good, I think that's a great tip for anyone that's thinking about their business or building a business, is figuring out, where do people hang out now? Because you're right, like the Clubhouse is definitely one of the big ones now, but then there will continually be more and more platforms. And people segmenting into the ones that fit their needs the most. So that's great advice. And then, so in terms of ideal client, researching, what else can someone do to overcome their fears of like starting something?
I think network like crazy, because a lot of us have got out the habit of networking. Maybe we felt, well, there's, my business isn't ready yet, or my business has stopped working, and now what do I do? And we've spent so long in isolation that it's really important to get back and start connecting again, even if it's online, even if you can't meet physically in person. I'm actually an introvert, so I've quite enjoyed just being online rather than meeting people in person, but that doesn't help me research or sell my products or services. So I really need to keep networking all the time and find a community which can help support what it is that you're wanting to do, so you can start asking those questions. If you're going along to a physical event, talk to the organizer and say, can you introduce me to a couple of people? So you're not going into the environment cold. You're actually able to start connecting as soon as you get there. And something that I really see people fail all the time on is follow up. They meet somebody, maybe it's not the person who's going to buy their product or service, but that doesn't mean that they may not know somebody that wants what you've got. So always follow up with people, and maybe it's a good time now also to be checking back in with your customers that you've not been in touch with for a long time. I encourage the Costa Women members, the business women, to continue posting on their social media platforms, even though maybe their shop had closed or things had changed for their businesses. Because otherwise, if you go to somebody's social media and they haven't posted for 3-6 months, you think, well, they've gone. So you stop following them. So it's really important for people to know that you are still around. You're just looking for the right opportunity to get yourself back into the market again.
Such good. I hope the listeners, anyone listening or watching this, make sure you're taking notes, because these are great tips and pieces of advice that's going to help you move forward in your business, but then also career. Like, this whole networking, and how do you do that now? Like, it is going to be the internet, but then there's so many different avenues to do it. People are more open to doing these types of connections, which I think is great. Whereas even a year ago, it's not as common, but now this is like normal.
Yeah. I mean, there were very, very few people had heard of Zoom, really, on a global basis, until March last year. And then suddenly everyone knows what Zoom is. And there's so many platforms out there as well that offer new ways of networking. We did an International Women's Day conference online in March, and we used one called Hop-In, which was great because you could actually have it allowed you to network on a one-to-one basis, and you never met the same person again in that session. So that was a really good platform. But there are so many out there now. And we try and collaborate as much as possible. So we've been working with a women's network in New York City for it's coming up to 3 years this summer. And every month we host an event where one month it's one of their members who's a speaker, and the next month it's one of our members that's a speaker. And that it's just a really good way to hear from other women what they're going through and to get support.
So wonderful. I love it. All these collaboration tools are now available to us. in terms of a piece of advice that you can give an early stage entrepreneur or someone that just might be thinking or they have an idea, what would you suggest they do or stop doing? Because you have experience with a lot of a lot of women that are starting something new, and maybe they make make a lot of mistakes and they could do it differently. So what would that one piece of advice be?
I think do the research really and find out if whatever it is you're launching is going to be of interest, and actually ask the questions of the audience first that you're working with, or asking networking groups if you don't have an audience yet, and wait and get all that feedback, and definitely ask if people would actually buy that product or service themselves, and if they would, then actually launch your course based on that feedback and based on the knowledge that somebody's going to buy whatever it is you're selling. Yeah. So don't waste your time creating the most amazing course without finding out first if someone's interested to buy it.
Yeah, such basic entrepreneurship 101. My first venture, I was busy creating rather than asking, and then I built something, but not to its full extent, and it totally failed. But I learned that lesson in that first venture. Ask first, listen, and then build from there. So that's great advice. Ali, so when things get rough, when things get hard, what do you do to stay positive? Because life abroad, moving around, all of these different things, businesses, lockdowns, yeah. All of this has happened to the world. So what is your philosophy or your way of staying positive?
And my husband and I both do this. We both look in the mirror and say, what's the worst that can happen? And once you've accepted the worst thing that could happen, yeah, and it very rarely happens, does it? The things that we have going on in our head that tell us, well, that person's going to do that, and then this is going to happen, and you've got this whole hamster wheel thing going on and spiraling. Just to look in the mirror and say, well, the worst is this, and now we can, if that's the worst, then this is how we've got to learn how to deal with it. That's how I try to stay positive.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to try that. No, it's one of the challenges, like the negative rumination, when you worry and then you cause anxiety and then your body gets into shock and all of these different things. But that's a great piece of that's a great thing to do. So everyone listening, make sure you try that out. If you ever feel, you're getting in that place of negativity, just talk to yourself in the mirror. And do what Ali does. And so Ali, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and also I think to remember what your goal is. Mm-hmm. As part of the Avenue coaching, we set 10-year goals for where we want to be in 10 years' time. And it could be that in 10 years' time, you don't want to be doing this anymore, you want to be retired, but you've built your company up to such a level that you can sell it or still be there as, say, creative director or something. So we look at that first, and then we work back to 90-day goal planning. So it's to keep in mind. So then when you do your 90 days, you're aligning it with what you have as your end goal. So that's something else I do to try and stay positive. In 10 years' time, you won't remember what you were going through now. You won't be worrying what the color of font that you used on your website was. You'll have moved so far forward in your business. And if you look back at 10 years ago, how far you've come in the last 10 years, how far forward you've come now. So that would be another way to, this too shall pass.
Oh, so good. So good. You're right. 10 years ago, I didn't even think that I would be doing this. It's amazing. And so Ali, final question. What is your definition of success?
Well, I love the dictionary definition of success, which is the good or bad outcome of an undertaking, because I think we always look at the good side of it. Yeah. And forget that sometimes success can have a bad outcome, but then you can choose what outcome you see. So if I see a bad outcome to any situation that I'm in, I try to look for the good in it or look for an opportunity. So my ex-mother-in-law used to say that if you're driving down a road and suddenly you're stuck in a traffic jam, it could be that being stuck in that traffic jam has meant that something negative won't happen to you. So, you know, don't get frustrated with what happens. And obviously success for me is waking up every morning and it's a new day. Knowing that I've got a clean sheet, that whatever has gone on in the last couple of days, today will be different. And I can make an intention and choose to make it so. Success is a muscle, and some days it hurts more than others. Some days it feels like, you know, I feel really strong today. It's a strong muscle today. And some days the workout is harder, but it's part of you and it turns up no matter what. So it just depends what you want to build and, you know, what success you want to build for yourself and your business.
So good, so good. I love the bad and the good outcomes, and choosing to look at, you know, even if with a bad outcome, looking at the good. What's the opportunity here? I think that is a great question for any challenge that anyone is faced with, is what's the good that can come out of this? I love that. That is why you are on the Positive Success Show, Ali Meehan. Thank you, Ali, for being on the show. And where can our listeners or, you know, audience find you, connect with you? What's the best way?
So they can either put Ali Meehan into Google, and there's two Ali Meehans really that are on Google a lot. One is a famous hockey player in Canada. That's not me. I've set up a Google alert for my name, and quite often I've won some amazing hockey match and I wasn't even aware I'd done it. So the other one's me, or at Costa Women on all social media platforms. So the @ and then Costa Women, not woman, women. You can find me there. I'd love to connect with women and maybe start doing some networking.
Excellent. Excellent. There you go, everyone. Make sure to connect with Ali. She is a great human being and also a great coach and entrepreneur and businesswoman. So make sure you connect with her at Costa Women, or Ali Meehan, not the hockey player. All right, Ali, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Dominique.